there are 100,000 yoga teachers.
Am I going to be a yoga teacher in this example?
Absolutely. Right. So the day there are 100,000 yoga teachers in India who are exporting their services, teaching yoga classes all over the world and making whatever X 100,000 rupees a month, automatically the awareness will spread, right? Because the benefit drives awareness, right? हिंदी में जैसे बोलते हैं अभिनव को कोई फायदा होगा वो 2 पैसे कमाएगा legally तभी he will essentially spread the awareness, he'll tell other people ऐसे मैंने 2 पैसे कमाए हैं, he'll pay his tax properly, right? So you essentially get everybody invested into the system.
In March this year, the Supreme Court struck down the Reserve Bank of India's 2018 circular, which had barred regulated banking entities from offering their services to organizations dealing in virtual currencies. Now, while that judgment came as a respite for the sector, investors still continue to remain concerned about the future of the industry, given how the government would seek to regulate the industry post the verdict. But the trading volume of cryptocurrency, however, in India has increased by 400% in the last few months. And this is all during the COVID time, with a daily trading volume of between $10 to $30 million. That's huge money. Several new players and even retail investors have entered the cryptocurrency trading market within the last 4 months, according to a report by Hindu. We have with us Naveen Gupta, Ripple's Managing Director for the South Asia and MENA region, and Sagar Sarabhai, who's Head of Regulatory Relations for APAC and Middle East. Naveen and Sagar, welcome to both of you. For the starters, Ripple is a technology company that provides a frictionless experience to send money globally using the power of blockchain. Recently, both these executives, which you see right now in shirts, they criticized decision by lawmakers in India and accused them of killing innovation. We'll get to know why and how. In addition, Ripple presented a policy paper which has already offered a model legal framework for India. Naveen and Sagar, we'll firstly start by allowing you to explain what is a cryptocurrency, because a lot of retail investors even now do not understand how crypto works.
Yeah, I mean, most of the people think that it's basically drug money or, money used to pay drug dealers and assassins and kidnappers. So I think we should clear the air right from the first second now. So yeah, over to you guys.
Thank you very much. Right. So just firstly, very quickly, right. So blockchain is in these early stages where internet was 25 years ago. So if you remember the internet, if 1995, 1997, you will talk about the internet, people will talk about it as pirated music, drugs being sold, and it being used for all nefarious activities. And then you saw the evolution of the internet itself, and serious companies like Facebook came along, or just simple Gmail came along, or searches came along. And what they did was they built use cases which everyday consumer could use, right? And similarly, blockchain is a technology like internet, which has got multiple use cases, some good, some bad, right? And as we are evolving in these use cases, good use cases are coming out, mature use cases are coming out, which the whole world can use. But let's specifically answer this question about cryptocurrency, right? Cryptocurrency, digital asset, it's called by multiple names, is nothing but programmable money. And let me explain what programmable money is, right? So let's assume today Rachit has a currency note in his pocket, a note, right? Now, what that note is different from the one that is in his pocket versus the 100 rupees that he has in his bank is that this note has a serial number, right? That's the only difference. Otherwise, he has got 100 rupees in the bank and now he has got 100 rupees in his pocket. Now let's assume this 100 rupees was not a physical one, but it was a digital one. Say it was an image on his phone, right? So in very simple terms, cryptocurrency is nothing else but a value, right? In this case, 100 rupees, which is ascribed to a number, a token number. So these are intrinsically linked together, and hence it's called a cryptocurrency, right? And of course, can totally be moved. Like the image that you have on your phone, you can essentially move it. You can send it to Abhinav, you can send it to Sagar, you can send it to Mui. And let's assume with the movement of that image to Naveen, the value also got transferred because you have essentially passed the serial number 123456 to Naveen. So now I'm the new owner of the serial number 123456. And now that value, in this case, 100 rupees is with Naveen for me to be able to use it anywhere. So it can be digitally transferred on a ledger. So when it gets transferred, a lot of time you would hear this word called as ledger. What it does is on your phone and on my phone and everybody that is on the call, on their phone, it is recorded that now Rachit has transferred that serial number 123456 to Naveen. and this transfer is final. That means now Rachit can't claim, hey, you know what, Naveen, by mistake I pressed this button, or can you give this money back to me? No, the ledger has already had recorded, and it has been recorded in everybody's ledger. So not just mine, but in Sagar, but in Abhinav, so that Rachit can't claim that, hey, you know what, I never sent this money. So once it's recorded, all of us, it is in the collective memory of our cell phone, in this case, as an example, and this programmable money has moved from point A to point B. A lot of people misunderstand this. The value to this particular serial number is not decided by Rachit and Naveen. So let's call it was a Bitcoin, it was Ethereum, it was an XRP, or any kind of a digital asset or a cryptocurrency. It is not decided by Naveen or Rachit, but it is decided by outside market. There are about, say, X hundred exchanges that essentially trade this particular digital asset or digital cryptocurrency globally. And they decide to say how many US dollar will they give for one Bitcoin, or how many Indian rupees they'll give for one Bitcoin, or how many dirhams they will give for one Bitcoin. And these markets are global. So the value is not ascribed by the holder of that particular asset, but the value is ascribed by the market itself. So there is billions of dollars of trading that happens every day, which essentially decides what the value of that currency is at a particular point. Simple terms, it's programmable money. It is a shared ledger. That means the ledger is essentially available on everybody's phone or everybody's database. And then when the transfer happens from Rachit to Naveen, in this case, that transfer is final. So he could essentially send it to anybody. And because it's recorded by everyone, there cannot be a double spend. Rachit can't send it to two people. And then the last thing I want to say is this is not a legal tender, right? A lot of time you would hear this word. So what is a legal tender? Indian rupee is a legal tender. But gold is not a legal tender. A Bitcoin is not a legal tender. Ethereum is not a legal tender, because these are not issued by government. These are essentially issued by community, which essentially comes together and writes these programs which are open source, and hence the issuance.
If everything is so fantastic about it, why do the governments have a problem?
So the first Bitcoin white paper came into being in around 2008-2009 period. That was the aftermath of the great financial crisis 2008. And you have to understand, at that point in time, the trust in the banking system, in the central banking ecosystem, was at an all-time low. There was this narrative that you would remember, the whole Occupy Wall Street movement in the US. And then people believed that somehow the trust in the system had gone down. And the Bitcoin white paper kind of encouraged this narrative that down with governments, down with central banks, Bitcoin potentially could replace all world fiat currencies. And I think that led to a sense of fear within the central banking community and regulatory community that this may start impacting the monetary policies of different countries. So I think that led to that kind of fear. But over the past 10 to 12 years now, we have seen an evolution happen. And I think regulators and central banks have started to understand the benefits of cryptocurrencies and blockchain. And as Naveen mentioned, multiple use cases have come along the way, and regulators and policymakers have figured out a way to regulate the use cases around this technology. However, there still remains a fear that this may impact monetary policies of different countries or may lead to all kind of nefarious activities, simply because these are borderless technologies. You cannot confine a digital asset to one particular country, right? However, if you go deeper into this, you can use some of the existing toolkits that are at your disposal in terms of what policymakers do, and they can use that same toolkit to regulate this. And that was the whole idea behind us launching this white paper, to provide recommendations on how this could be better regulated.
Sure. Can you tell us something about that white paper, and why do you think that the government is killing innovation in this space?
Actually, it would be wrong to say that we criticize the government in terms. I don't think the intention was to kill innovation. It's just that, as you would know, India is a very complex country. It's a huge country. There's a huge demand for inbound remittance. There are issues around terrorist financing and money laundering and capital outflows. So from a policymaker's perspective, they have to be very careful. I'm actually hopeful that this so-called ban or the uncertainty around this is not permanent. Even as we speak, I'm confident that policymakers internally are deliberating the best possible approach to have the best possible framework to regulate this. Now, the paper basically, what it does, 2 or 3 simple things. What it does is it lays out the global regulatory landscape. It gives out benchmarking to the Indian policymakers, a one-stop shop where they can see what other regulators have done globally. Then we urge Indian policymakers to consult the broader public and the stakeholders in the ecosystem, like they have done with various big policy proposals in the past, be it the data privacy bill or the bankruptcy code or even TRAI's net neutrality bill that came a couple of years ago. Our second request is to come out with a framework to define digital assets. As Naveen mentioned earlier, there's a lot of confusion globally, not just in India. So what actually is it? Is it a currency? Is it a commodity? Is it a security? So we are urging Indian policymakers to first define what it is.
Just to ask, has there been any response from the government so far?
We continue to engage with them. It's still early days, but there is no concrete conclusion. It will be a long process. It will be a long organic process, but we continue to engage with the policymakers.
If I take out the political correctness, the answer is no.
It's again, as I said, it's early days, so it will be difficult to. As you know, these things take time.
Sagar, it's funny that you say that it's early days because, as you might know that China, Thailand, they all are testing their own central cryptocurrency. Where in 2020, when China and Thailand are actually testing their own cryptocurrencies, India is still at its early stage to actually define what a cryptocurrency really is and whether it's safe or not.
Before I answer that, let me correct you that. So when you say China and Thailand are introducing their own cryptocurrency, I don't call it a cryptocurrency. That is not cryptocurrency. Okay. That is a central bank issued digital currency. Now that is different from cryptocurrency. The premise of a cryptocurrency is that it is decentralized. There is no one central party doing this. While what China and Thailand and Singapore are doing, it is not cryptocurrency. It is a digital currency, which is backed by the Singapore dollar or the renminbi or the Thai baht. Crypto is an asset. It's not backed by anything. It's backed by mathematics. China and Thailand and Singapore and some of the other countries are definitely experimenting with this. I have a different view on this. I think the central bank digital currency solves very specific use cases. RBI has done an amazing job with creating the local payments infrastructure. So technically, we don't need a central bank digital currency to solve the payments problem within India internally. Now, of course, there is almost a race going on to kind of who is the first to launch this, and there's also this fear of missing out, of FOMO, where a central bank starts competing with a Bitcoin or a Ethereum or an XRP. But if you sit back and think logically, a central bank needs to ask, why do we need a central bank issued digital currency?